Chapter 24 Rachel's Tale. Benoni, the oldest coyote, began his life in play. Sisters were for biting. Sisters were for cuffing. Mothers were for innocent faces when the sisters tattled. Then sisters were for yanks on the tail when a mother had punished the troublemaker anyway. It was a glad way to be, and sleep was easy, and mornings were right, and the world was good and happy. But very soon, Benoni's attention became fixed upon his father, Ferric, and life took a serious turn. Ferric was clearly haggard when he brought them foodstuffs in the evening. Twill and Hopsacking would nuzzle his chin. This was the way they persuaded him to reverse his swallow and to present them with lumps of sweetmeats, which they then fell upon, cracking and chewing mindlessly. But Benoni would hold back. He saw the worry in his father's eye, and he knew himself to be the oldest, an important station in life. Trouble matured the child faster than the months. There was less to eat, so he ate less, even as his father Ferric ate nothing at all, and he smiled less. Rachel watched her son. She saw him to be thinking more than he ought to be. A pup borne down by burdens, and she noticed that he woke up when his father woke in the morning, and she understood that he hated the shortness of his legs. While Ferric stood high on the rim of the canyon, staring eastward with obvious tension, Benoni whined at the lowest stone, too small to climb one step. Every fiber in him stretched, and his tail went down with the effort. But when his father launched and left, Benoni stood still on hind legs and cocked his ears and listened. What could he hear? What did he think? I'm going to lose him soon, thought Rachel. Too soon. She tried to keep things gay for all her children, playing with them herself and prodding them to speak whatever came into their heads. But Benoni spoke less than his sisters now. He watched the rim of the canyon. She led them daily down the stream, splashing in the water that held its warmth and singing thoughtless rhymes. Daily they visited the bird in her bush, whom the children called Aunt, and who would pick through their soft fur like a clicking scissors. She loved them absolutely. Their laughter sent her hopping all over the bush. But Benoni began to lag behind when the women set off southward on a morning, and he seemed to recognize a difference between himself and them. And finally, he chose not to go at all. Do you think your aunt is silly now? Rachel asked when she returned to find her son sitting at the bottom step. No, said Benoni. Are you bothered by your sisters? Are they too foolish for you? No, but you would rather be here than with us. Yes'm, said Benoni, uncomfortable. Why? Oh, said Benoni, I'm older now. I will watch out for the den. I can be alone sometimes. Yes, you can, said Rachel quietly. She gazed at his soft, earnest face. What do you do when you are alone? Think. It's a grown-up business to think, she said aloud. But to herself she said, soon, too soon, and her eyes went sad. She prayed for this son, and she truly didn't know how quickly the world would snatch him from her. One afternoon, when the mother and her daughters came splashing back to the den, Benoni was gone. The mother's manner changed. No, this was too soon. With two sharp barks, she ordered Twill and Hopsacking into the lair, where they were to lie perfectly still until her return. Then she dashed up the stairs and raced to the plains, the thought of her baby by her heart. Noni! Benoni! The ice world was both grand and deadly. The pines were silent. She trotted into their dark interior, but then she did not know where to go. Benoni! Echoes laughed. Ice cracked. A load of crystal crashed to the ground, and Rachel ran headlong. Benoni! The baby's legs had grown to match his yearning, and he could climb the stones now. But his wisdom did not match this world. Why hadn't she demanded that he stay with them, even if he didn't like it? It didn't matter what he liked. What mattered was his safety. But the pine were mighty, and blind, and careless of a mother's child. Benoni! Nee. Where are you? You. Benoni! Tell me where you are! She heard a faint wail to her left. She froze. Again, it sounded so vulnerable. It was Benoni. Rachel sobbed, and then broke in that direction. Extraordinary leaps she took over hillocks and across ditches. Quick, efficient arcs she described around the pine, and she ran. And when little Benoni saw her coming, he cried, "Mama!" and darted toward her, a red pellet with serious eyes, so that they collided, and the pup pushed himself hard into his mother's chest, deep and deeper, and he wouldn't quit pushing. She held him, gazing upward. She said, "Where were you?" He shook his head. She said, "Were you lost?" She felt him nod once, and then he burst into tears. Oh, how Rachel gathered her son so tightly under her chin. How dearly she pressed him in. "I was so afraid for you," she said. Ice slid from the treetops and smashed on the ground, and the baby jumped. Bones and glass rained down around them. His sobbing went straight to her soul, and she swore he would never cry again, and she knew it was a lie. She whispered, "Were you running away from us?" He shook his head. "Oh, Benoni, didn't you know that this is a hurtful world?" she asked. He nodded against her chest. "Yes'm, I knew," he said, and gravely he explained, "It's why I came." "What?" Rachel backed away from her son to look at him. "What?" she said. He averted his eyes. His fur stood out from his cheeks like a soft sunburst. His tail was no more than a trigger cocked, but he was a deep little coyote. "What?" she said. "To be hurt?" "No," he muttered, "but to help Papa." "Whisht! Your Papa needs help?" Benoni bowed his head, embarrassed. He nodded. "Why? Is he so weak?" "No, not weak," cried Benoni, gazing at his mother to be sure that she knew he didn't think his Papa weak. Then he said, "He's afraid." Rachel could say nothing to this. Soon, she thought behind her glittering eyes. Too soon. "I came to help him fight the enemy," Benoni said, "but I didn't find the enemy. I didn't find Papa. I turned around this time and that time. I turned around too many times," said Benoni, his lip beginning to quiver. I got lost." And at that announcement he cried again. He crept back to his mamma and curled himself beneath her neck. She stroked him, his fine red fur, and wished that the need would never, never end. "Benoni, Benoni," she whispered, "who is the enemy?" But at that moment and in that place the pup had run out of words. He could say no more than his mamma had said. He too said, "Hoo!" and he sobbed, "Hoo!" Ferric, far away from his family, but gone on account of them to find food, was trying to eat a pine cone. He had a sour expression on his face. The thing stuck out from his jaw like the abdomen of an enormous insect, its scales scraping his tongue, and he was grinding it soft at the middle. Tasteless and mean, the pine cone, a bitter dinner for anyone. But what else was there in this deep frozen world? Like finger parings, it broke into his gullet. Fibers jammed between his teeth. His eyes watered up. He was miserable, forever conscious of the nasty food he brought his children, and always afraid that this would be the last. Suddenly the floor of the forest trembled, and the coyote froze, the pine cone like a dead wing at his cheek. Who was this? It was no wolf's prowl that he felt. The wolves had left. Besides, whoever was coming took no care to be quiet. Boisterous, careless, tramping the earth as though he owned it? Happy! Someone mighty ignorant, thought Varric in his freeze. And then a long brown animal bounded into view, jaunty, on 4 short legs, smug at his snout, flashing a black eye. He had but 1 ear, the size of a nickel, but so much energy that the coyote cringed and wished that he had run. "Ha!" cried the traveler, and he stopped. "What is here? A wooden critter, what? Do you move, wooden critter?" He walked straight up to Varric, who hid the harder, and yanked his tail. He punched his stomach, saying, "Hmm." He tickled the bony ribs, and Varric's eyes flowed water, but he kept his freeze. "Well, well, John W.'s has seen him some curiosities in his adventurings, but wooden critters is something new, you bet. Hello! Hello!" He shouted into Varric's face, as though raising his voice would help. "Hello! Hello, wooden critter! Does he talk?" All at once, this W sat back in astonishment, and poked his head up high, and hung his paws at his breast, the better to consider. "Looky here," he whistled. "Doesn't move, doesn't talk, but what? By God, it cries! Little tears raining down, wooden critter is sad. John is sorry for you, too. Might be teeth got stuck on piney cone and can't eat no more. Makes him skinny and scared. Hungry? Is somebody might be hungry in there?" For a long moment, the 1-eared bellower stared at Varric, tipping his head left and right, waiting for an answer. The coyote nearly cracked to be stared at so directly. How could it be that one single animal could turn this lonely forest into a party? "Okay, hungry," said the traveler, satisfied that he had hit upon the problem. He took a deep breath. "Looky!" he roared, and with much gesticulation, he explained where food was. He praised the golden cock in charge of it, and rattled on about the great company of animals already gathered there beneath the jurisdiction of the cock, how content they were, so to be fed, so to be ruled. Varric, imagining so many creatures like this one to be all in one place, hissed a little. "Sst! Nope!" shouted the traveler. "Is no thankings for John, no sir. John he does his business, and then John he goes. Bloody warriors is always on the move." And then, true to his word, the traveler left as wonderfully as he had come, muttering, "Doesn't talk, wonders if wooden critters knows how to listen, wooden legs, wooden brains." Varric ached. Society itself had come and gone in the person of a long animal. The forest fell darker now and quieter in his absence, and Varric sat down, still sucking the pine cone. So, there was food to the south. Food for the feeding of his children and his Rachel. Oh, but what a terrifying way to get it, dodging the eyes of 1,000 beasts, daring the dangers, Varric swallowed his pine cone. He looked up at the trees for another. It was deep in the night when this father descended the canyon stone to home. It was through darkness that he heard his son's voice saying, "Papa can't fight the enemy alone." And it was with a certain guilty stillness that he paused to hear the rest. "Fight the enemy, Benoni?" "So says the cub," said Rachel in the den. "So says the soft paw." "Don't make me little, Mama," said Benoni. "You are little, Benoni." "I'm older than I was." "My son, not old enough." "But me and Papa are 2. I should go with him. He can't fight alone. Papa is scared." There. That paralyzed Varric on his own doorstep. Scared, Benoni? Too shamed to go in, too much in love with his son just to go. Benoni? Instead, he stopped where he was and listened. "Scared," said Rachel with much greater ease. "Of what?" Benoni whispered seriously, "The enemy." Rachel lowered her voice. "Benoni," she said, "who is the enemy?" "I don't know." He lowered his voice too. "I never seen. I only watch Papa's eyes, staring at something I never seen. Something so bad that Papa's afraid of it. I feel so sorry for Papa. Ferret Coyote sat down in darkness and hung his head. He heard a long pause pass, and the rustle of Rachel's settling herself. "Noni," she said, "I am here, Mamma. Will you come lie by me?" There was smaller rustling in the den, and then softly, "Noni?" "What, Mamma?" "I don't think you need to be sorry for your papa," she said. "Perhaps you don't understand why not, nor what a special coyote your father is. Benoni," she said in a very terrible whisper. "What?" he said. "I will tell you who the enemy is. Listen. The enemy is the witch with no stomach." Silence. Benoni squirmed at the horror of this news. "She wraps herself," said Rachel, "in robes of air, and goes through the forest, bending the trees as she passes by. Sometimes her robes are as white as the mist. Sometimes she goes softly, and no one is afraid. Sometimes she screams through the branches and breaks them, hurls them down to the ground. Then no one can sleep because the witch is angry. What do you think she is looking for?" "What?" said Benoni. And Rachel said, "Why, children." "Oh," said Benoni, "children who have left their mammas and their papas and wandered off alone. Children with no one to protect them. Children who thought that they were older." "Oh," said little Benoni, "there was a bear cub once who thought that he was older. He went into the forest and got lost. When the night came, so did the witch, whipping her foggy gown from tree to tree until she saw him. She shrieked, Benoni. She opened her robes and what do you think the bear cub saw?" "What?" whispered the coyote cub. "Did he see?" "Nothing. He saw nothing at all. That's why they call her the witch with no stomach. In the middle of her is the place where nothing is. A frightening sight to see. All of the nothing of the world comes from her middle. Well, and she circled her sleeves around the lonely bear cub, and this is what the witch did then. She ate him up." "Ate him up," said Benoni. "Up, down, and then gone, and nobody saw him after that because, of course, she had no stomach, and little cubs, when they are swallowed down inside of her, go nowhere." "Nowhere?" said Benoni. "Nowhere at all. Nothing is in nowhere. Nowhere is where nothing is, and nowhere is the stomach of the witch." The little bear was nowhere. But nothing in a nowhere can't be very filling, can it? "Oh, no," said Benoni. "Of course not," said his mother. "Therefore the witch was never full." So next it was a youngling hawk she ate, and after that a badger, and pretty soon all of the children of the forest, whisht, were gone. Rachel fell silent. The silence lasted long, since Rachel was a patient mother, but Benoni was not a patient son. "Is that the end?" he asked. "Well," said Rachel, "it might have been the end, except for one mighty coyote." "Oh, yes," sang Benoni, "a mighty coyote." Listen. All the mothers of the cubs came together, and they wept and wailed for their children, and the whole forest shuddered with their sorrow. "What will we do?" they asked. "Oh, what will we do?" they answered themselves. A great bear came forward and stomped the ground. "I am strong," he roared. "I will beat up the witch with no stomach until the children come home again." But the mothers were wiser. "How can you beat her up," they asked, "if you can't take hold of her?" The bear put down his head and shuffled away. No one could take hold of the witch with no stomach. A hawk came forward. "I am swift," he announced. "I can fly as fast as the witch when she blows through the forest." But the mothers were wiser. "Can you be everywhere and nowhere at once?" they asked, "for the witch shakes all the trees and all the branches at once." No, the hawk could not be everywhere and nowhere at once. No one No one could be nowhere, and no one could talk to the witch, and no one could find her. Animal after animal failed to be the right one to save the children, since all of the animals were someone. So what were the mothers to do? Who could help them? Someone? Said Benoni. No, and Rachel said sadly, not someone. Poor Benoni felt sad too. No one? He asked. Right, cried Rachel with surprising praise. Right, no one. No one was the only one who could beat a witch, or else be everywhere at once, or talk with a witch, or find her. No one. No one alone. Oh, Benoni, you are so wise. And here's the beautiful part of my story, said Rachel. Within the forest there lived a humble coyote. So humble and scared was he that whenever they asked his name, he mumbled, "No one. I am no one at all." And when they asked him if he was good at anything, he said nothing. And when they asked him where he lived, the lowly coyote said, "Nowhere." Isn't that wonderful? All of the mothers cried, "No one! You're the only one! None of the someones around can save our children because they know nothing about nothings, but you do. Please find the witch with no stomach. Oh, let no one go." Well, in no time at all, no one went nowhere. He went to utter humiliation, which is the witch's stomach, and there, most bravely, he did nothing at all, which to him was as natural as loving children. No one never tried to do that. He took hold of a bear cub's paw and a youngling hawk and a badger, and child after child he raised them from the witch's stomach back to their mothers. "And the mothers were happy?" cried Benoni. "So happy," said Rachel, "so happy." Ferric heard that they were hugging in the den, because his son laughed aloud at the story and grunted with the hug. Ferric sat with his snout between his forelegs. "Mama," said Benoni, the oldest coyote, much less sad. "Benoni," said Rachel, "is that a true story?" "Well," she said, "one way it's just a story and I made it up. But if you think that the witch with no stomach is the wind, or maybe she's the winter that's eating us now, then I suppose that it is true after all, and then I've shown you the enemy that frightens fathers, haven't I?" The cub fell silent a while, and then, "Mama?" "Benoni." "Well, is Papa a mighty coyote?" "Your father?" said Rachel, in the dark den, hidden. "Your father, Noni? Whisht! He has a great heart, child, full of love for you, and he is your father. This is the truth. Ferric is mighty among all of the creatures on the earth." In the morning, Rachel found 5 balls of food at the door of the den, pine cones once before their swallowing. She understood their number on sight. 1 for her, 3 for the children, and 1 for the bird in the bush. None for Ferric himself. He had gone. Chapter 25. Dawning. At midnight, Chanticleer the rooster wanted to be alone. Night after night he escaped the overwhelming duties of the day, not by sleeping, but by walking down the hard ice of the Liver Brook alone. He muttered to himself. He stopped and puzzled and came to no answers. He shouted at God, throwing out his wings. He carried the 1,000 spirits of the animals in his breast, and he asked nothing at midnight so much as to be left alone. The animals who had gathered realized his need, though they didn't understand it. After compline, they nestled to their sleep, and they left him alone. Nobody troubled the troubled rooster. Therefore Lord Chanticleer was not pleased to see a shadow cross the stream in front of him. It went from the right to the left and broke his broodings. In a moment it went from the left to the right, a quick wrinkle in the night. Then all was darkness again. But his solitude was gone, and his attention was stuck downstream, and the frown was stuck on his face. While he watched, that shadow shot 5 more times across the stream. He counted the times, growing more and more irritated. Some busy creature, some idiotic shuttlecock. The 7th time the shadow passed, Chanticleer fixed his eye on the wood where it went, and rushed to the spot with a great flurry of feathers. Between 2 trees, in dim light, he found a frozen little beast, thin as a tweezer's and stiffer than toothpicks. He put his rooster eye to the creature's slant eye and snapped, "Good night!" It was as gentle a command as he had at the moment, and should have been sufficient. Any stronger, and he thought he would shatter a fellow so brittle and fixed. "Good night!" The rooster turned on a back toe and continued pacing 100 yards down the Liver Brook, and then was thunderstruck to see the same small beast ahead of him, frozen in the same position, this time squarely in his path, though not a sound had passed between. "Good night!" roared Chanticleer at this piece of sculpture, using bombast after all. "Good night!" from 30 paces, and then again, "Good night!" from a foot. "Good night!" as he continued downstream. Well, if the command itself did not inspire obedience, then the rooster had to drop a detonation or 2 to force obedience, roosterly fashion. Curious, however, that the beast did not budge, no, not a quiver, despite the impact of Chanticleer's nearest. Good God! There it was again! 100 yards ahead, still in that same egregious crouch, a tinderbox of tensions, an aggravation to the midnight cock, a beast in very danger. Chanticleer bore down on it. Arguments flooded his mind. This time the creature moved. The tiniest, dreariest grin curled down his jaw from the cheek to the point of his snout, and he said, "Tssst!" "Ha!" snapped Chanticleer. "So wire can make a sound! Ha! Can wire also untaught itself and go away and go to sleep? You could eat in the morning with all the animals. Tssst! What, you don't like that?" thundered the cock. "What, you think you're something special? Listen to me, you insignificant nit. Neither you nor anyone else is special. Good night. Nobody's special. Everyone's special, or no one would survive. Good, get your butt out of here, night!" But suddenly a sort of fit seized the little beast, a shuddering and a writhing within himself. At once Chanticleer feared that he had overwhelmed the fellow, and remorse, the same old immediate guilt, poured through him. With all his heart he repented again his habit of hurting the meek, and his soul turned within him. He looked carefully and saw suffering in that slant eye after all, and he wanted to touch the beast, to apologize, and to feed him at once. But this trembling was not a reaction, it was willful, and the little creature was not so much suffering from something as suffering towards something. He was in a mighty struggle, all the while gazing at Chanticleer. He was battling desperately to what? To do what? Why, to speak. All the groaning and twisting and striving produced one word. "Rachel!" And the beast bowed down and sighed. "Rachel," said a tender Chanticleer. He picked the word up as a precious thing, since it took so much effort to create it, and since he had almost ignored this one of God's creatures. "Rachel. A very important word, I see, the name of someone, and she is important. Are there others?" Well, that was another nearly impossible task, but this little beast was uncommonly tenacious. He fought hard and long, first to say, "Benoni," and then, "Twill and hopsacking," and with a final effort, "Bird in her bush, so hungry." Then he sat down in a haywire heap, faint for all he had accomplished. Chanticleer looked upon him and was moved. What love this fellow must have for a Rachel, so to sacrifice himself this way, enduring rooster attacks and overcoming even his own nature. Skinny could be very, very strong. "You are a coyote," said Chanticleer. The coyote nodded. "Coyote, forgive me for what I said before," said Chanticleer. "You are special." The coyote shook his head. "You don't know," said Chanticleer, "but I know. You have done a remarkable thing for Rachel." He sat down before the coyote to put that one at ease, to make amends. Here in the night he gave a coyote his whole attention. "Therefore," he said, "this Rachel must be a remarkable creature." The coyote nodded. His slant eye moistened. This was good conversation. Chanticleer pursued it. "And the Benoni whom you speak about must also be exceptional." The coyote nodded, almost to the point of smiling now. "And there's a twill, I perceive, and someone of noteworthy beauty named Hopsacking." The coyote was nodding with glad volubility. "And a bird," said Chanticleer, "the only one whose name you haven't told me. Perhaps you'd like to chat a little with me," said the rooster, further to comfort a coyote, "and tell me her name, too." And Chanticleer succeeded. The frightened coyote lifted his face in honest pleasure to the rooster and spoke. He smiled and said 2 words which stunned Lord Chanticleer no less than a spike to his brain. The coyote said, "Jug, jug." "What?" said Chanticleer. The coyote said, "No name for her. She can't talk. Poor bird has no tongue." He smiled. Chanticleer did not smile. "You said, 'Jug, jug,'" he said, drilling the coyote with an immovable eye. The coyote's smile slipped a bit before this intensity. He said uncertainly, "It's what she says." The night stars loosened and began to wheel around Lord Chanticleer. The woods and the earth rose up to float about his ears. The universe was tipping, and the rooster felt as though he would explode for the thing occurring. He bit hard against his excitement and whispered hoarsely, as carefully as he could, "Again," gazing at this beast, this oracle of God. "Say again what the woman says. Again." "Jug, jug," whined the coyote. Chanticleer let a laugh slip out of his solemn face. It sounded like a bark, and the coyote shrank. "Jug, jug," he stuttered, "and Teru." The rooster's beak drove closer to a coyote, so that a coyote fell closer to a freeze. "And she," hissed Chanticleer, the delight about to rupture. "She's sad. I mean sad." The shrinking coyote nodded 1 minimal degree, and that was the end of communications for the night. Because the rooster blew up, Lord Chanticleer rose on his wings, laughing loud and long and lustily, a geyser of joy. "And you know where she is! And you know how to find her! And here you are! My God! My God!" roared Chanticleer. He soared into the sky, he whose flight was usually lumbering. He flew high enough to see dawn at the eastern horizon, and his heart burst for the seeing of the dawn. He cried, "Oh, my dear God!" And he meant it. And then he swooped to the topmost branch of the tallest tree of the highest rise around, where he stood black against the gray dawn, and he, Lord Chanticleer the rooster, gleefully took dominion of the world. "Jug!" he crowed a new crow. His head went back. Oh, see the acrobat! His wings swept out. His lungs were brass, and lauds broke bright upon the gloom, and animals were jolted awake, and the sun himself seemed tardy. "Jug, jug! Oh, worm! I have found you out, and I am coming! Mundo Cani, here I come to you! Teru! Teru! Teru!" Chapter 26. Daybreak. "Mrs. Cobb, did you hear that?" "Aye, it woke me." "What was it?" "I don't know. I truly don't know." Should the body go investigate? I don't know that neither, Mr. Cobb. A pause. It could be dangerous. Could be. Probably is. Deep ponderings in the squirrel's burrow. And then a memory. I saw lightning hit a master elm once, Pertinax Cobb said carefully. The light blinded me, shot down the tree trunk in a flash, cut it, like peeling it, and such a boom went with it that I tumbled backward. For a second, all was quiet, like sleeping. But then Mrs. Cobb, that there elm, she sang out, a screeching, like I never heard before. And what should I see but the elm tree splitting, heavy limbs on one side, heavy limbs on t'other, gone splitting slowly down the middle, screeching. That, Mrs. Cobb, that, I swear, is the sound I just heard again. Pertinax Cobb's wife shuddered. Cobb said, It wants investigating, doesn't it? Mrs. Cobb said, It does. I'm off, said Cobb. She said, Can I go with you? And I should be grateful if you did. Down the Liverbrook, in the dim grey dawn, stood a single figure, Pertolote the hen, gazing southward. She was holding her breath, her wing at her throat, herself as silent as the ice, waiting. 2 squirrels crept toward her from behind. Chanticleer, whispered Wodenstag. He didn't move. 7 little noses were pressed together in star formation. 14 eyes were open to the darkness. 42 whiskers twitched. The brothers' mice were wide awake. Wodenstag had spoken first. Well, I think so, Wodenstag, said Freytag. Chanticleer. Crowing, said Samstag. Far, far away. But when did he crow like that before? Said Freytag. The rooster, he never crowed like that before, said Wodenstag, unless it was when his children pleased him. Oh, Wodenstag, cried Samstag, the youngest of them all, I am so happy. You should feel how my heart is beating. Every mouse began to wriggle. The star expanded. And you know why you are happy? Whispered Wodenstag, full of awe. Why? Said Samstag. Because the rooster is. Out of the earth flew 7 mice. Down the frozen Liverbrook they darted, around a bend and straight ahead, where they saw 3 creatures sitting still, facing south. Their poor hearts were tripping away, yet they restrained themselves and with grave formality took places behind a ground squirrel. She turned and smiled greeting upon them, and then she pointed to the other squirrel, so stiff beside the quiet Pertolote. Mr. Cobb's investigating, she confided. And the mice suppressed giggles of glee. What a marvelous occupation to be investigating. There was a hawk whose head came up to the daybreak cry like a gun hammer. His stern eye flared with the light of gladness, and his whole body trembled to soar. Goats heard the ram's horn. Goats heard the trumpet, which once had blown the battle note so wildly that it cracked stone. Goats woke with that sound in their hearts. They took to their hooves. They stamped toward the Liverbrook. The pronghorn leaped straight from their sleep. The whole herd danced like raindrops on puddles down to the Liverbrook. The eyes of String Jack popped out of his head in opposite directions. What? The flanks of the noble deer began to shiver. The sparrows chittered. Partridges made silly bubbles in their throats. The jay plain laughed. The great camp of the animals awoke in all its sectors and stirred and wondered at the good feelings and the sweet anticipation running through them. And grinning, they followed a general flow, rank upon rank, in tribes and families, by breed and individual wish. They came and filled the valley of the Liverbrook. What? But Pertolote stood the foremost of them all, stood silently, in patient grace, waiting. It was Chalcedony, the crippled hen, who went close enough truly to see the woman Pertolote, and the sky was brighter when she came. She had no thought in her head save to sit near the kindest heart in this vast congregation. But when she saw the face of her lady, the words flew out of her of their own accord. Ma'am, wailed Chalcedony, ma'am, oh, ma'am, why are you crying? Then came Chanticleer. That rooster strode the Liverbrook as one in full possession of the land, his jet beak shut upon some glorious news, his tail a fountain, his white nails flashing, his eye clean, bright, and pure. Lo, he had arisen from his gloom. Who could be sad any more? He was the sunlight coming home, bursting twice his size. Who could look upon such a lord and not smile? White breath puffed faster and faster from animals' nostrils. The excitement tingled through them. Someone giggled. Everyone waited. But Chanticleer leveled his gaze and took deliberate time to approach the one in front of them all, Perlote. Silently he stopped before her. He nodded twice. With her eyes, which were brimming with tears, with her eyes alone, the woman questioned him. She searched his face, and he did not flinch. He smiled, and he nodded. She put out a wing and brushed his neck. "Can I touch you?" He did not draw back. Again he nodded. So then it was that Perlote lowered her head and like a child moved very close to him. And it was he who swept her into a full and mighty hug, he who buried her head in his breast. Her shoulders began to shake. She was weeping, unashamed. The animals saw that, and many of them, too, began to weep. But Chanticleer raised his head above his wife. "Oh," he said with a grand pride, "oh, Perlote!" He closed his eyes below the sky. And then this is what Lord Chanticleer did. He opened his beak, and he laughed. The rooster burst into a long peal of rolling, uncontrollable laughter. He breathed, and he laughed again. So then the poor animals were crying and laughing, both at the same time, whose mood had been so dreary till this morning, laughing because the rooster laughed, crying because their lady was so glad. And a new sound rose up above the land that day, a deep and throated, holy sound, the whole camp participating, none left out, none louder than the others, and this was the name of the sound. It was joy. Ah, Chanticleer,